Hi everyone. In this section, I'm going to show you another way of initializing the state inside the useState hook. This way of initialization is called lazy initialization of a state or lazy initial state. How does that happen? Let's check it out. We have already seen this kind of code where we have the useState and inside that you give the fixed value. This can be a number, string, boolean, or even array or object literal. The value which we are assigning is just a fixed value at the moment. Let me first of all create a function, which is possible that you may have a function inside the useState. So let me just say a function which has some process, but at the moment we create a function, let's say initial state. Now this function is going to return the state instead of the state you assign directly. So this initial state function call will return the 0. So I will write return 0 here. Now let's just refresh the page and we see the functionalities same. What React says in this case is that on every re-render call, this initial state line is executed. That is, this useState and initial state is executed. So for example, if you are giving a fixed value like 0, true, false, then there is no problem. If you are having a primitive data, you do not have any problem. But imagine that you have a function like this which has some expensive process. That's what the official site of React says, that when you have an expensive process, then this is where you need to take care and you should go with lazy initialization. Just to show that every time when re-render is executed, this portion is called, I'm just going to add one console log here. So I'll say console log. I'll simply write expensive process, though it's not very expensive. And let me also just add date.now. So that will give me a new value. So in console log, every time you have different value. Now let me refresh first of all. It called the render twice. That's why every time this initial state, whenever there is a re-render, this initial state line is executed. It means even if I click on the increment, you see there is a line added always when I click on increment, because a re-render is executed, and on every re-render you will see that this useState and initial state is executed. So this is very clear that whenever there is a re-render, this state thing is going to execute with initial state. Now if you have, let's say, any expensive process, say for example you have some object here, right, and that you are having some JSON.stringify, and let's say you have some new object that is assigned, and then at the later stage you are returning this particular object. This is a kind of heavy process. Now in such kind of processes, every time a re-render is executed, at that time if this thing is getting called, it is not a very good practice, isn't it? So let me just undo everything. We just assume that this is an expensive process. That's it. So now what we want is that every time when re-render is executed, we do not want that this initial state should be executed. For that, what you can do, you can call this function, or you can rather initialize with a lazy method. It means you are going to add a function here. I can say function here, right? And then I may have a return statement which is going to give me the final value. But instead of writing this way, you can always go with a shorter syntax. So instead of this, what will I do? Because it's a single line, I will write an arrow function and will write the function itself here. Now earlier you did see that whenever we called increment, it was calling this function, and that is the reason why every time this console log was getting executed. Now because I just added this function call here, that means now I am loading, I am initializing the state with a lazy method. Let me refresh. 2 times it has called expensive process. That's fine. Now see, I click on increment. Again click on increment. The value is getting incremented. The state is changing without any problem, but now that expensive process thing or the initial state function is not getting called. This is what lazy initialization of state is. Always remember, whenever you have bigger process which is going to give you the initial state value and that you put it in a function, then don't just write the function only. Do make sure that you follow the lazy initialization. That is, you just add a function here. Again, I would like to repeat that I just placed an arrow function here. You can anyway write a detailed function, but normally you see that when we are using arrow function, we prefer to have single line function only. So this is what lazy initialization of state is. Now let's talk about a relative question, that is, explain lazy initialization with useState hook, or what exactly is lazy initialization. So we have already seen that on every re-render the useState is called, and when you don't want to execute the initial methods, then you write a returning function inside useState so that it does not call it on every re-render.